Thanks to our episode sponsor, Falquier School of Culinary Arts. Have you ever dreamed of a career in the culinary world but wondered how to make it work with your busy schedule? Falquier's online culinary program could be the perfect fit. Imagine building the skills of a professional chef right from your own kitchen. Each week, you'll dive into course content with readings and videos, join live discussions with chef instructors and classmates, and submit assignments complete with photos and feedback. You'll also complete an externship in a professional kitchen, giving you real-world experience before you graduate. To take the next step towards your dream career, download Falquier's Culinary School Preparation Guide to see if it's right for you. Just head to falquier.edu/culinary medicine. That's ESCOFFIER.edu/CULINARYMEDICINE. And now for today's episode.
I had a patient who was struggling with a lot of anxiety, and he was having spikes of anxiety and panic throughout the day in conjunction with acid reflux and bloating and gas. So we just did mindful eating. We didn't make any other changes to his nutrition. And within the first 2 days of doing mindful eating, the reflux went down. He started feeling less anxious. He felt more tuned into his body. He recognized when he was hungry, and so on. And that was within just a couple of days.
Welcome to Culinary Medicine Recipe. I'm so happy you're here. I'm your host, Dr. Sabrina Falquier. I was a primary care doctor for 16 years and went to school for 4 years to specialize in culinary medicine. In this work, I get to combine my passion and expertise in both medicine and food to teach people about food as medicine and to empower them to understand what ingredients optimize health and also how to cook those ingredients to make delicious meals. On this show, I interview top chefs, doctors, healthcare visionaries, and food service professionals who are making great strides in the field of culinary medicine. Join me as we continue to explore the amazing world of culinary medicine, where I will empower you to make changes to your health and wellness with great food right away. So today we're going to be talking about the impact of diet on mental health, specifically anxiety. But for those of you that have sleep problems, don't worry because we're going to get into that as well. Anxiety can feel so isolating, but it's actually one of the most common mental health experiences. You're definitely not alone. We're bringing in Dr. Nishi Bhopal, who is a triple board certified physician in psychiatry, sleep medicine, and integrative holistic medicine, as well as Ailar Poonian, who is a certified clinical nutritionist. Welcome, Dr. Bhopal and Ailar, to today's conversation. As we get started, I'd love to hear you guys explain what is it that you do and how does that work happen together?
I can start. So I'm an integrative psychiatrist and sleep medicine physician, and I'm the founder of Pacific Integrative Psychiatry. We're an online telehealth practice seeing patients all across the state of California. And our mission is really to provide a whole body approach to mental health and sleep issues. So what that means is that for people who are struggling with anxiety, depression, insomnia, daytime fatigue, brain fog, those kinds of symptoms, we really like to look at all aspects of their health and lifestyle that could be impacting it. So in traditional psychiatry, there's a lot of focus on medications and on talk therapy, which are incredibly helpful tools. But we go a step further where we like to look at their nutrition, which is Ailar's specialty. We look at their sleep. We look at exercise, the mind-body connection, gut health, which we're going to talk about a little bit today. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we do. And then Ailar is such an integral part of our approach.
Yeah, so I am a certified clinical nutritionist, and I'm also a certified diabetes care and education specialist. And I really specialize in functional medicine or functional nutrition, which takes a holistic approach or integrative approach, just like Dr. Bhopal mentioned. So we really work in conjunction together to guide patients on how the gut and the brain are connected, how they signal back and forth, how they communicate and talk. And patients really start to see the connection between how their mental health drives their eating habits, their diet, and vice versa, how their diet and the food that they eat impacts their mood and their mental health.
I think what's so fun about working with Ailar is that as a physician, I can make some recommendations to patients about their nutrition, their diet, but there's only so much that I can do in the span of time that I have with patients and also with my training. I'm not a nutritionist by training. So to have someone like Ailar on my team, I can refer patients to her And then what she can do with them is help them come up with a meal plan, help them come up with grocery shopping lists, all the little details where people get tripped up. Because everyone has kind of heard like, okay, you need to eat healthy, eat more whole foods, cut down your processed foods, cut down sugar. But how do you actually implement that in your day-to-day life? That's where people struggle, right? And so that's really Ailar's zone of genius, to help people figure out a plan that works for them, that's personalized to their unique needs and lifestyle.
So how does that play out as far as, say I'm coming to you as a patient and we realize I have anxiety and insomnia, which I'm sure is not uncommon. And so I have an appointment with you, Dr. Bhopal. How does the interplay with both of your areas of expertise work?
We actually have a whole set of intake forms that people fill out before they even see anyone in the practice. So that way, not only does it give me as the physician a good knowledge base to work from with that patient to get an understanding of where they're coming from, but it also assists the patient in understanding themselves. So patients will sometimes say to me like, oh my gosh, you asked so many questions on these forms and it got me thinking about things that I hadn't really thought about or I didn't know were relevant. Once the patient sees me for that initial intake, we'll talk about their diet, their nutrition, and what impact it might be having on their health, their physical health, mental health, and sleep. If they're motivated, right? So like not everyone's going to be motivated to go deeper, but if they feel ready, if they're motivated to take the next step to make some changes with their nutrition or at least just get some guidance and input, then I'll refer them to Ailar. And then she'll take over and she has a whole series of things that she does with patients, which I'll let her share about. But then we'll work in conjunction. So we work inside the same medical record system. So she can see my notes, I can see her notes, and we collaborate. And I think that's really one of the magical parts of our practice is that we have this ongoing communication and collaboration versus sending someone outside of the practice. You kind of don't know what's happening. So patients really appreciate that we're all working together as a team. So they feel really contained to have so many people supporting them.
So just like Dr. Bhopal mentioned, when a patient is referred to me by her, they're already familiar with our practice, they're familiar with our approach. I myself really like to use tools through the Institute of Functional Medicine, so questionnaires, or there's a nutrition and lifestyle journal, which I really like to use, and it gets patients thinking about, okay, how is the food that I'm eating related to other aspects of my life, like my sleep, my mood, my mental health, my relationships, my spirituality, if that's a part of your life. So we really have really customized tools that we use, questionnaires, surveys, and it gets patients feeling a little bit more comfortable. I know it can be a little bit intimate talking about your life and especially your diet. Some people feel judged, which can be very normal, but we really try to get everyone to feel comfortable and know that the more that they share with us, the better that we can guide them.
So let's go back to some definitions, which I realize this work may not be familiar to people. Dr. Bhopal, could you explain what the gut-brain connection is?
The gut-brain connection is like a two-way highway. So there's constant communication between the brain and the gut, and they're sending messages back and forth. And what might be surprising to people is that there's actually another nervous system in the gut wall. It's called the enteric nervous system. And it's also known as the second brain. And so when I explain that to people, sometimes it clicks. They're like, oh, that's why when I get nervous, I get butterflies in my stomach, or I might feel nauseous when I'm anxious, because there is that other brain that's happening in the gut, or you have that gut feeling, right? That's where that term comes from. The other thing that might be surprising to people is to learn that the gut nervous system actually contains more nerve endings than the spinal cord. And one of the functions of the gut is to produce neurotransmitters. So the gut contains about 95% of the body's serotonin, about 50% of dopamine. There's 400 times more melatonin produced in the gut than there is in the brain, in the pineal gland in the brain. And psychiatrists have known for decades that about 60 to 70% of people with depression and anxiety have GI issues, like IBS or irritable bowel syndrome. So it's really relevant to mental health, even though nutrition and diet and looking at gut health hasn't conventionally been a part of psychiatric evaluation and treatment. We do know that there is that connection. So it's really exciting to see the research coming out on the gut-brain axis and also the microbiome, which refers to the trillions of little microbes, bacteria, and other microbes that live in the gut that help to produce those neurotransmitters that I was talking about, that help to send those messages back to the brain. So helping to foster a healthy microbiome, which simply means you want lots of different kinds of bugs in your gut. So you want to think about creating like a rainforest type of environment in your gut versus like a desert where it's all homogeneous. So eating lots of different kinds of foods, which Ailar can talk about, will help to increase the diversity of the gut microbiome. And we know when people have a more diverse microbiome, they're less prone to developing chronic diseases like type 2 diabetes, like depression, anxiety, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's disease.
Do you want to add to that, Ailar?
Yeah, absolutely. So just like Nishi mentioned, the microbiome really does need to be diverse, and it's not just bacteria. I know a lot of times we talk about bacteria, but there's fungi, protozoa, viruses. So there's just so many different microbes that exist in there. And we're specifically talking about the gut microbiome. And when we mention the word gut, people think like, oh, my stomach, like it's all down here. But the GI tract is huge. It starts in our mouth, right? It runs all the way down our body. And keeping a healthy gut microbiome involves nutrition, but it also involves other aspects of our lives, which is why our practice does such a great job at integrating things like sleep, mental health, things like that can also positively support the microbiome and also help its structure and help support keeping the good bacteria in and not allowing a lot of the bad bacteria to get in and cause things that really can cause digestive issues for patients, which is most often when people start to notice, hey, something's wrong here. Like, hey, I feel a little constipated, I feel a little bloated, and that's your body sending signals that there's something off with the microbiome. And I always like to use this example. I heard a doctor talk about it once, and I apologize, I forgot his name, but it's kind of like thinking of it as a screen door. So when your screen door has holes in it, bugs get in, some good stuff, maybe like fresh air or purified air in your home might get out. So it's like letting the good bugs out, letting the good bacteria out, and letting some of that bad bacteria get in. And they like to live in our gut, and they like to feed on some of the unhealthier types of foods. So some people notice like, hey, I'm craving more sugars, I'm eating more carbs, or when I eat these foods, I actually get more gassy, more bloated. And it's because these bad bacteria are actually thriving from these foods, and they're actually asking you to eat more of these foods. There's a condition called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and it literally is what it says. So the bacteria start to climb up your digestive tract, and they start to grow and thrive in the small intestine. And some of the most common symptoms people report are things like bloating and constipation. And it's these bacteria just really loving the food, the unhealthier types of foods, and they're just growing in your digestive tract, and you may not be aware of it until it becomes a bit more chronic, and it does really start to affect your mood and your mental health as well. So having a healthy gut microbiome can definitely help protect you from having things like that.
When we talk about foods affecting the microbiome in either a positive or a negative way, let's go back a little bit. If you were explaining, I'm sure this conversation comes up, and it does for culinary medicine a lot, of not vilifying certain foods, but to have people understand, this judgment of good foods versus bad foods. What are broad strokes, would you say, of foods that are commonly eaten that lead the microbiome to be less healthy, more desert-like, as Dr. Bhopal mentioned?
One of the main things that I always try to make an effort to do, especially during a first consultation, is to help patients really understand that we need to have a healthy relationship with food. So if someone comes in and they're already having me here say, these are the bad foods, and that's what their diet mostly consists of, then we're already not able to have a conversation where they can comfortably share with me what their diet really looks like. So they might just leave some things out here and there, which doesn't allow me to get a good assessment of what their diet looks like. So what I say is just having a healthy, well-balanced diet most of the time. It's just like anything you do in life. It's really hard to do everything perfectly all the time. Like getting 8 hours of sleep every single night, probably not going to happen. So if you can have a healthy, well-balanced diet most of the time, it's going to make the most impact. So what does that look like? Well, first we have to talk about what foods should you try and limit or avoid as much as possible. And one of the main ones I say is highly processed foods. So not avoiding processed foods altogether, which can also be really difficult to do, but there's highly processed foods and then there's processed foods. So an example of a highly processed food would be like Oreos, right? Things you see with like a really long list of ingredients, things you can't pronounce. There might be high fructose corn syrup, refined starches, sugars, things like that. And then there's processed foods, which often tend to have minimal ingredients and they have things that you are familiar with. Like, let's say a box of oatmeal, like it has oats, maybe it has cinnamon, it has sea salt, right? Other spices, things like that. And it's a little bit processed, but it's not highly processed. And then there's the healthier foods, which you're going to find in not boxes or packages in the grocery store. So you're going to look in the fresh produce section, like fruits, vegetables, protein, like chicken, eggs, fish, things like that. So we really want to have variety in our diet, thinking about trying to eat the rainbow as much as possible, different colors of fruits and veggies, whole lean types of protein, or even plant-based types of protein if you're someone that doesn't eat animal products. And again, trying to get all of your macros, things like protein, which animal sources, again, fish, chicken, eggs, turkey. Plant-based sources would be things like beans, lentils, nuts and seeds, soy-based types of protein like tofu and tempeh. And then we have our carbohydrates, which are the starchy foods, things like bread, rice, potatoes. We have complex carbs, which are a bit higher in fiber and tend to actually help the gut microbiome and the structure of the gut. Those would be things like oats, whole grain types of bread, brown rice, wild rice, sweet potatoes. And then we have our fats, or I say try to stick with healthy fats as much as possible. And those would be things like avocados, olive oil, nuts and seeds, and wild fatty fish.
That helps a lot to get a visual of what is, you have this blank plate and now you're being told or starting to understand that all these things are quote unquote bad, but what do we add? So thank you. That helps to give such a visual. Why do you guys think, I'll have you start with this, Dr. Bhopal, that there's so much more of a conversation between the gut-brain connection now than there was even 5-10 years ago?
Yeah, I think the science has been evolving on it. And now I think part of it is social media, like with so much conversation happening online, people are having discussions about nutrition. I'm seeing this with sleep as well. I'm a sleep specialist too. So even 10, 15 years ago, people weren't really talking about sleep. But I think, a big part of it is just the emerging research. But what's really fascinating about this is these aren't necessarily new ideas, right? Like we've known for millennia, if you look at traditional healing systems like Ayurveda from India or traditional Chinese medicine, they knew that the gut was so essential to health, to overall health. They knew that the food that you eat impacts how you feel physically and mentally. So these aren't newfangled sort of ideas. It's just that the research and science is catching up to it. And interestingly, when I was in medical school, I went to medical school at University College Cork in Ireland. And back then, some of the researchers in psychiatry were doing a lot of microbiome research. So they have a center called, I think they may have changed the name now, but it was called the APC Microbiome Center in Cork. And so on my way to classes, we would kind of cut through the food sciences building. And so they were doing a lot of the microbiome research there. So we even had lectures back in med school, this is now like almost 20 years ago, talking about the impact of the gut microbiome on mental health. Professor Ted Dinan, he's one of the researchers. John Cryan is another one. So if anyone wants to Google their names, you'll see lots of talks on their research on psychiatry and the microbiome. All of that to say, back then it was cutting edge, and I didn't realize that. I just thought, like everyone's learning about this. But when I started working in psychiatry, no one was talking about it. So I didn't realize how far ahead they were in their research. But now it's catching up to become more mainstream. And I think nutrition, it's one of these things that it's relevant to everyone, right? We all have to eat. And so people are really interested in knowing what to eat and, how are these different types of foods affecting us? And, what's the research behind it? And I'll just put a little caveat around that too, because there is so much information that it can get really confusing and overwhelming. And then people can go down these rabbit holes of let me do the ketogenic diet, or let me do a vegan diet, or let me try carnivore, or whatever it is. And you can lose the forest through the trees. So that's where, coming back to basics and having this personalized approach that Ailar provides is really important.
That happens so frequently in this work, that getting so caught up in the details of reminding people to step back and say, are you filling your plate with, like Ailar, how you mentioned, the rainbow, whole fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and well thought out proteins, and really trying to simplify it within all the confusion that it is. Yet, we do now have this tool of testing the microbiome. So how does one do a test? And are they available readily?
So microbiome testing, there's so many different tests out there, and there are new tests still being developed. So patients can readily access a variety of tests online, but interpreting it is a whole nother step. So it's like, you get the results, but what do you do with it? And that's where a lot of people get stuck, because they get kind of answers, but then they don't really know what to do with it, or how can they modify their diet to get the results they're looking for. So that's why it's really important to work with a practitioner, someone who's specialized, someone knows how to interpret the results and how to guide you or create a personalized plan and approach to help you resolve the symptoms that you have and really explain the answers to you, or the results of the test to you. So we use a variety of different tests in our practice. There are a couple ones that are my favorites to use based on some of the common symptoms or complaints that I see in a lot of our patients. So we have stool testing, we have urine analysis, we have blood tests. I mentioned SIBO, that's done through a breath test. Some people maybe do a saliva test, which I don't use very often. So there's a variety of different ways to do it. And the results that you get really depend on how the test is done, when is the test done, did the patient perform the test correctly, were they taking any supplements right around the time of the test, or did they stop their supplements a couple days before the test, which we always try to let patients know that they need to do. And then these tests look at things like the gut microbiota. So especially things like a stool analysis will tell us what type of bacteria are in your stool. And again, it's at that time, right? So it's like what specific part of the body or what specific time was this stool analysis done. So these are the bacteria that are present. They will tell us the ratios of these bacteria. Do you have too much of certain bacteria, too little of other bacteria? And then someone like myself will help guide you on how to balance this. So stool analysis specifically indicate things like leaky gut or dysbiosis, which again is just kind of that imbalance. Like I explained with the screen door, some of the good bacteria have been let out, some of the bad bacteria have stayed in or have overgrown in your gut. So how we can balance this through diet by maybe eliminating or trying to avoid certain foods temporarily, increasing your intake of certain foods, like especially high fiber foods to help support the gut. Some people may require supplementation, like pre and probiotic supplements that can really help balance the bacteria in your gut. So there are a variety of different ways to do the tests, and I always explain to patients, like, here's the test that I recommend, here's what it looks like, here's what it's going to tell us, and I leave it up to them, because we're not really here to be like, you have to do all these tests. Some people maybe don't want to pay a lot of money to have testing done, but there are a lot of tests that give us more answers. So those are some of the tests that we use, and again, we always give patients the option to decide.
If somebody, how you mentioned that you asked them to stop supplements a few days before, what if somebody had their lovely moment with Oreos the day before? Like the whole, not just the little pack, but like just went to town with it. Can it affect the outcome of the testing that quickly? Like you mentioned supplements, you stop it 2 days ahead. Can it go the other way where you have ultra-processed food, the mayhem of them a couple days before?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I know a lot of patients get hung up on this, especially when they see a result that they don't like. And they're like, wait, actually, like right before the test, I did this. Do you think that's what caused it? So as a certified diabetes care and education specialist, I always tell patients, like when they do a blood sugar test and let's say their A1C, which is this average measurement of your blood sugar over the past 3 months, but it's really concentrated in the past month before the test. So they're like, wait, right before the test, I had like a cake for breakfast. Do you think that's why my A1C is high? And I'm like, well, no, because it was like an average over the past 3 months. So certain tests can be impacted by what you did right before, like maybe a triglyceride test, which is a certain type of fat in the body. But when we're looking at something like your microbiome, this is something that is a bit more chronic. The types of bacteria, the overgrowth, things like that, they don't really happen overnight, which is why a lot of patients wait to come to us until their symptoms are becoming more bothersome. It's not like, hey, I've been bloated for 3 days and I decided to come see you. It's like, no, I've been bloated for like 2 years, or like, oh no, I've been like constipated for several years on and off. So these things are a bit more chronic, and it's not like something you did the night before or the morning of is really going to cause that result to be abnormal.
Dr. Bhopal, do you want to add?
Like Ailar was saying, it's not a requirement. A lot of what we can offer can be done without lab testing, and making changes and listening to your body is really important. So a really crucial aspect of what we do is helping patients connect with their intuition so that they can feel what they're feeling. They know what they're feeling. They can keep track. They can track their triggers. They can develop that sort of innate intelligence, or fine-tune that innate intelligence to guide them. And then a test is sort of like the cherry on top. Like we can go deeper, we can go granular, we can look at it for data-driven people. We have lots of people who work in tech or they're engineers and they want the data. So great, we can do the tests, or we can do blood work. So we really like to meet people where they are.
If somebody fully listens to both your wisdom and expertise and starts making these giant changes, what has been your experience of when people start noticing changes, and again, focusing on anxiety and sleep, of improvement in those symptoms?
Yeah, I can share a little bit, and I'd love to hear Ailar's experiences too on this. So there's a few stories that come to mind. So with one of my patients, we really focused on mindful eating. Okay, so when we were talking about nutrition and mental health, it's not just about what you eat, but how you eat it has an impact. And so sometimes we'll just start with that. Like we won't even make any changes to what the patient's eating, but we'll recommend that they sit down when they're eating. So Ailar and I have a video on our YouTube channel about mindful eating. So if anyone wants to watch that and get the instructions, Ailar did a great job at explaining what that is. But essentially, in a nutshell, it's making sure you're sitting down, making sure you're chewing your food thoroughly, that you're taking a break between bites, that you take a few minutes when you're done eating before you get up so that your body can fully digest. So I had a patient who was struggling with a lot of anxiety, and he was having spikes of anxiety and panic throughout the day in conjunction with acid reflux and bloating and gas. So we just did mindful eating. We didn't make any other changes to his nutrition. And within the first 2 days of doing mindful eating, the reflux went down. He started feeling less anxious. He felt more tuned into his body. He recognized when he was hungry, and so on. And that was within just a couple of days. So these changes can be quite immediate, right? Pretty quick. Another patient of mine that I saw just recently, she was also struggling with sort of these spikes of anxiety throughout the day. And we theorized that it could be related to hunger and fluctuations in her blood sugar as well, because drops in blood sugar can look like anxiety. The symptoms are very similar. So we had her do mindful eating, and then not space out her meals as much. So just eat a little bit more frequently throughout the day. And again, within a day or two, there was immediate relief. So these changes can be really, really quick. In terms of sleep, it can kind of go either way. I have had patients tell me that they sleep better if they do have a little bit of a fast before they go to bed. So, if they don't eat 3 to 4 hours before going to bed, they actually sleep better. And I have other patients who tell me they don't sleep as well. They wake up at night if they don't eat an hour before going to bed. So tuning into yourself and understanding what works for you is really important here. But again, you can see immediate results, within a night or a couple of nights. With some of my patients who struggle with brain fog or a lot of fatigue or low energy during the day or excessive daytime sleepiness, what we might even call hypersomnia, sometimes cutting out gluten can be really helpful. This is anecdotal, okay? So like this is sort of like cutting edge. It's not really, I mean, it's semi-supported in the literature, but it's something that we'll recommend, kind of like using an anti-inflammatory diet sort of approach. And in those cases, within a few weeks, I have seen people start to have more energy, less fatigue. They feel less brain fog during the day, more mental clarity. We're not talking like, you have to do this for 6 months straight. And yes, the longer you do it, the more changes you're going to see. But just doing an experiment for a week or two, you can start to see some changes. And I'd love to hear Ailar's thoughts on that.
Yes, absolutely. So just like Dr. Bhopal mentioned, some of these complaints that we get, let's say someone with heartburn, acid reflux, you can really see changes right away, depending on how much you really stick to the plan, right? So it's like something that you're doing all the time, you're more likely to see results faster versus something you're doing some of the time. Like this mindful eating approach, let's say you're practicing mindful eating every single day, every single meal, you're more likely to see results versus if you're doing mindful eating maybe a couple times a week. So if someone is coming to me with chronic bloating, chronic constipation, they do want to see results right away, but I always explain to them, this sounds like it's something that's been going on for years. So it is going to take some time to really heal the gut, heal the microbiome. It's kind of like you're growing a plant, right? You have to water it, you have to watch it grow, watch it thrive, really nurture it, take care of it. And it's same thing with your body. So you really have to put that same type of care and effort into your own gut, into your own microbiome. So if someone is having issues like that, then I really try to encourage them to start slow and start where they want, just like Dr. Bhopal mentioned, meeting the patient where they're at and saying, hey, I don't want to start with mindful eating. I want to start with drinking more water, right? So it's like, if that's what they want to do, that's great. That's also something that really matters. So letting the patient know that these are your options, you're in control, but here is what's going to help the most, and then leaving it up to them. Because if I tell them what to do, they're less likely to stick with it. But if a patient decides this is what I want to do, and they have a follow-up appointment coming up like a month later, I always hear this. It's like, hey, I knew we had this visit coming up. So like the last week I've been really good about drinking more water. So it's kind of like that accountability factor. And I think having these visits, having these follow-ups really allows patients to see better results, see faster, quicker results because they're being kind of guided a little bit more by an expert and they're being followed more carefully.
So my last question I have is, so you've decided to do testing on somebody for the microbiome. You find these changes, maybe supplements were added and the food changes. Do you do repeat microbiome testing? If their symptoms are getting better, do you automatically do retesting or not necessarily?
So for a lot of patients, I often mention, we really want to see, did these supplements help you, or have you really been taking them consistently, and do you need to continue taking them? Because a lot of times people think, I just take a multivitamin and then I'm good, and this is what I do for the rest of my life, or same with pre and probiotics. Some people think everybody needs to take this. So I think repeating the tests are really important because they give us the answers that we're looking for. And just like Dr. Bhopal mentioned, some people are really data number driven and they want to see that. So a lot of our patients want to see, hey, my magnesium levels improved, so that's probably why my constipation went away, and they really like to see that. And I always recommend repeating the test, especially when we get a baseline for it. We want to repeat it and see, did these supplements help you? Did the changes in your diet, let's say someone had high oxidative stress levels, they've been eating antioxidant-rich foods for several months, did those levels go down? And then we probably won't need to repeat it once we get them back to their normal levels. But again, nothing is really required. You don't have to do tests. You don't have to repeat them, but seeing those answers can be really helpful.
What's the time frame then? Like with diabetes, we often test, every 3 months or so. What would it be for this situation?
I recommend 3 months, and it's from the time that they start making the changes. So often I'll see a patient, they'll order their supplements or they're they're going to order their testing kit. By the time they really get it and they send those results back and we actually get them, it might take a couple of weeks. So it might actually be 4 months from the first time that we saw each other. But I usually like to repeat that test in about 3 months.
I do have an encore question then. So you mentioned supplements are used at times. So you mentioned probiotics, which most people have heard, and prebiotics. How do you decide when to use food as your prebiotic with the high fiber foods versus a supplement that's prebiotic supplement?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question. So supplements and food work slightly differently, and I always say food first approach. So people kind of want like the quick fix. They're like, oh, let me just take a pill instead of having to eat the rainbow. Like that sounds a lot easier. But if you are able to incorporate a food first approach, not for someone, let's say they have like severely low levels of vitamin D. I wouldn't say, try to eat vitamin D rich foods, but food first approach, really try to heal through diet, try to eat well first, and then we add supplements. Just like the word says, it's a supplement to what you're doing. Things like a pre and probiotic, you may want to look at what kind of brands there are out there. What kind of bacteria does your body need? Do you really want to be taking this supplement? Has it been tested, clinically proven to be effective? So I would say that for pre and probiotics, they work in conjunction together really well. So taking a pre and probiotic supplement in combination. But you can also get it through food. And the way it works is your body breaks down the food. So a supplement, you can take it fasting and it can really make its way down to the gut, which is really nice. So in the case of pre and probiotics, I really like that about certain supplements that are clinically proven to be effective. And I say take it fasting first thing in the morning because your digestive system is going to break down the food a little bit more before it makes its way down to the small intestine, large intestine, where it can really do the work. So in that case, a supplement might be more helpful, but you can also get it from food because I know these supplements can be a bit pricey. So like prebiotics, which is the fiber food that the probiotic bacteria feed on. Prebiotics you can find in things like artichoke, plantain, garlic, onion, probiotics, fermented foods like kimchi, sauerkraut, tempeh, miso. So again, you can get it from food. Supplements can be a little bit more helpful in the case of pre and probiotics, but again, not necessary.
So as we're finishing up, I'll start with Dr. Bhopal on this one. Is there anything that wasn't said today that you want to make sure that our listeners hear?
There's sort of 3 categories that I think about when it comes to supplements, so like 3 main buckets. So are we using them for prevention? So for example, using folate during pregnancy. Are we using it for repletion? So are we trying to replete a vitamin D deficiency or an iron deficiency, which we'll see a lot in patients with anxiety and sleep issues? Or are we using it as a therapeutic? So are we using it maybe for its calming effects or something like that in anxiety? And so I think just having that framework in your mind can give people just a little bit of structure instead of feeling like, oh my gosh, there's like 20 different supplements I need to take and you don't really know what they're for or why you're taking them. So just thinking about them, okay, is this for prevention? Am I repleting a deficiency? Am I using it for its therapeutic effects? And then just having an end date. So whether we're prescribing a medication for support or for prescribing or recommending a supplement, it's a good idea to have an end date on it. So talk to your healthcare practitioner about what would be appropriate. Even if we're supplementing for a deficiency, we might recheck their vitamin D or iron in 3 months' time to see if they still need it, if they still need that dose. And that'll help kind of cut down on what people are taking, because sometimes we'll see people who have been on a supplement regimen for a decade. And they just didn't know that, they didn't need to take it anymore or that there should be an end date. So I think those are just some general guidelines for people to think about.
How about you, Ailar? Any last thoughts?
Especially when it comes to the topic of nutrition, just like Dr. Bhopal mentioned, there's just so much information out there nowadays, and a lot of people are looking at things on the internet, things being promoted like carnivore diet, ketogenic diet. So it can be really confusing. Just keeping in mind that everyone is different, your body is different, your lifestyle is different. Just because ketogenic diet worked for someone else doesn't necessarily mean it will work for you. So really understanding what what your goals are and how nutrition or talking to an expert like Dr. Bhopal in mental health can help you. So what is your purpose behind it? What is your end goal? Just like she said, having like an end date, like in the next 3 months, I really want to be able to do X, Y, and Z. So really just keeping that in mind and then trying to create a personalized approach for it, knowing that things can take time. Someone might see results in a week, someone might see results in a month. And that's why I think having a functional medicine or a holistic and integrative approach is really important. So you can really look at all aspects of your life versus putting all your focus on one thing and just really trying to see results by focusing on that one thing versus knowing that there are other areas and other things that can be impacting what you're going through or the symptoms that you're experiencing, and that you're not alone. Like, everyone goes through similar things, and talking about it, especially talking about it to an expert, can be really helpful.
This conversation has been really fantastic to really look at whole person health and not fragmenting somebody into these silos that often happens in healthcare. So I really, really appreciate both not only your own insight in your own area of expertise, but even in this conversation, I can see how well you work together. So if people are interested in working with you both, how would people reach you?
Yeah, so the best way is to go to our website, pacificintegrativepsych.com. Our practice is called Pacific Integrative Psychiatry. You can book a free call with our team via our website. It's a free 20-minute call, and they'll talk to you and just make sure our services are the right fit for you. We do see patients across the state of California virtually. And we occasionally offer workshops and other programs that are open to anyone anywhere. So even if you're not in California, you may be able to attend some of those. And you can join our email list. We have a Supplements for Anxiety free download on our website. So if you choose to opt into that, you'll get on our email list, and then you'll get more information about our other upcoming events.
You mentioned social media also. What is the handle for that?
So we're at Pacific Integrative Psych on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook.
Wonderful. Thank you both truly so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you feel motivated by this episode. Please leave us a rating and a review and mention our show to others who you think could use this information. That could be your doctor, it could be somebody who works in the food service industry who's interested in the health components. It could be a friend that is working on their health journey. If you want to hear more, please remember to follow Culinary Medicine Recipe on your favorite podcast listening platform. Until next time, salud and bon appetit. All content provided or opinions expressed in this episode are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice. Please seek advice from your doctor or other qualified healthcare professional.